The anime begins in a kingdom where magic reigns, and making things float is something normal. Additionally, dragons are the most common creatures in the area. Then, we see a boy named Bash in the middle of the forest, who is the opposite of what has been mentioned. Next, we see an old man who apparently knows how to use magic, named Regro, who introduces himself as Mash's father and claims that at 75 years old, nothing can stress him out. Just at that moment, the protagonist appears and removes the door from the house instead of opening it normal. Consequently, Regro gets stressed and scolds him. After this, the protagonist tries to put it back in its place, but all he manages to do is shatter it. So, Regro gives up. Later on, the protagonist asks him why he makes him train his muscles so much. The old man confesses that Mash is different from others because he can't control magic. With that said, Regro decides to leave the house and tells him not to go to the city while he's away. However, the protagonist immediately heads to the city in search of cream puffs. Upon arrival, he realizes that everyone in the city uses magic. Later, he arrives at a shop and orders the cream puffs. However, he realizes that he has squashed the coins, so he repairs them with his strength, which scares the shop owner. Then, the protagonist reveals his face, surprising the people because unlike everyone else, he doesn't have a mark on his face. On the other hand, an officer named Brad punishes a man who tried to commit a robbery, but he stops when he's informed that there's an unmarked boy in the city. Back with the protagonist, he collides with a drunk officer and drops his cream puff on the ground, staining his uniform. The protagonist tries to clean it, but ends up stripping the officer due to his strength. After this, Brad arrives and tries to apprehend the protagonist. However, Regro appears and quickly takes him away. Then, Brad creates a magical bird and sends it after them to discover their hiding place. When they get home, the protagonist apologizes to Regro and promises not to go to the city again. As a result, Regro punishes him by making him do exercises. Later, the magical police, led by Brad, arrives at the house and confronts Regro while the protagonist finishes his exercises. Back at home, the protagonist overhears Brad punishing Regro, who resists and refuses to tell him where the protagonist is. However, Brad throws him to the ground and mentions that a person without a mark has no right to live. Nevertheless, Regro begins to remember that he couldn't use magic before either, and that's why his mother and everyone else called him useless. One day he decided to take his own life, but when he was about to do it, he found a crying baby, who was the protagonist. Realizing that the baby had no mark, he decided to take care of him. Back to the present, Regro starts screaming desperately for the protagonist to run. Therefore, Brad hits him and concentrates his power to finish him. The protagonist breaks the door and hits one of the officers. Then, he strips the drunk officer and slaps him. Consequently, Brad laughs at him and starts casting a spell he used against a dragon. Then, he hurls it at the protagonist, who simply dodges it with his hand. Brad is surprised by this, so he continues casting spells at the protagonist, who dodges them and even starts juggling and playing soccer with. As a result, Brad gets so angry that he tries to use a more powerful magic. However, the protagonist takes Regro's magic wand and throws it at Brad, cutting his cheek. Seeing this, Brad falls to the ground. After that, he tells the protagonist to make a deal, which involves studying at a magic academy and earning the position of illuminated by God. However, Regro asks him not to do it, and Brad explains that if he refuses, the entire kingdom will pursue him for life. He also claims that he only wants the money he'll earn from that position. With that, the protagonist accepts. Later, we see the protagonist, with a mark on his face, approaching an academy, stating that if the world doesn't let him live peacefully with Regro, he'll break it to pieces with his fists. The next day, the protagonist is at the Eastern Academy with other students. On the other hand, we see a boy named Claude, who looks at the students and remarks that this year seems very promising. Then, noticing the protagonist, he sees that instead of preparing his magic wand, he is exercising and eating cream puffs. So, he says that he'll surely fail the entrance exam. Subsequently, Claude introduces himself to the students and welcomes them, mentioning that he will be the one to give them the exam. He then conjures some tables and drops the exam papers onto them. Seeing the enchanted paper that keeps moving, the students realize that the exam is charmed. Seeing this, Brad and Regro realize that the protagonist won't be able to pass the test. However, the protagonist shouts at the paper and uses his strength to hit it, causing the letters to stop moving, allowing him to finish the exam. So, he shows it to Claude, who is surprised to see that his answers are correct. After this, the protagonist continues to pass the tests. Claude uses his magic to create a huge maze and explains to the students that they have 30 minutes to reach the goal, and those who succeed will be able to study at the academy. With that said, a girl named Lemon approaches the protagonist and asks if she can be with him, to which he agrees. While navigating the maze, Lemon stumbles and gets caught in all the traps until she falls into a hole. She asks the protagonist to wait for her. However, he continues walking, so Lemon uses her magic to tie his hands and feet. Nevertheless, he uses his strength and runs away. After that, a giant monster comes after Lemon and takes her magic wand. Now completely defenseless, the monster takes her weapon and throws it. Then, the protagonist returns and hits the monster, saving Lemon. On the other hand, Claude smiles, thinking that the protagonist won't pass the test, as he's sure that Lemon managed to distract. After this, the students hear a noise until the protagonist and Lemon appear, showing that they crossed all the walls in a straight line. This annoys the students as they claim it's cheating. However, Lemon defends the protagonist and confesses that Claude sent her to distract him. In response, Claude admits it's true and claims that he can fail anyone he wants. He also begins to insult Lemon and challenges the protagonist to a fight. The protagonist breaks his wand as a result. Then, the director named Walbert appears and stops them. He also states that he'll be in charge of the final interview. Later, the protagonist is taken to a room where he meets the director and other magicians. In this, Walbert tests him and asks what he would do if he encountered a being stronger than. Then, he casts a spell that causes Rigro's soul to move into a doll. He also uses a large lance that slowly approaches the doll, explaining that if it pierces it, the soul will die. With that said, the protagonist tries to hit the lance but realizes it's too strong, so he uses his hands to protect the doll. Seeing this, the director congratulates him and welcomes him to the academy. The next day, the teacher gives the first class, explaining how to use magic to unlock a door. However, the protagonist ends up using his strength, which angers her. Later, a student named Finn looks for his room but realizes there's no door, until suddenly the protagonist appears with it. Next, the protagonist shows Finn his muscles and asks what he has to do to become the illuminated one of the academy. Finn explains that he needs to earn gold coins, which are obtained through exams, tests, and more. The protagonist shares one of his cream puffs with Finn, saying he's a good guy. Later, he asks Finn to lend him one of his brooms for the class since he mistakenly brought a root. The next day, the teacher tells the students to use their magic to make their broom float and fly on. The protagonist tries to talk to his broom but gets no response. So, a guy approaches him and starts calling him useless. As a result, he hits the ground, making the broom jump into his hand. This annoys the guy who challenges him to a flying competition. As a result, both of them line up at the starting point. Then, the teacher starts the race. With that said, the protagonist shoots off at an incredible speed, leaving the other guy immobile. Upon seeing this, Finn is astonished but claims he saw the protagonist throw his broom and then run to get on it. Later, the guy gets angry and calls the protagonist a cheater. At this point, a guy named Cable appears and shuts him up. He also asks the protagonist to be his friend while the students seem to fear him. Furthermore, Cable holds the guy and starts hitting him for not defeating the protagonist. On the other hand, Finn tells the protagonist that Cable is the son of an agent from the magic agency, which is why the others fear him. He also explains that Cable is very close to the vice director, so obeying him is not optional. In the evening, the protagonist starts preparing cream puffs while Cable waits for him in the field, losing patience. The next day, he approaches the protagonist and tells him that if he does what he orders, he'll speak well of him to the vice director. So, the protagonist agrees and starts doing things for Cable, like carrying his stuff and cleaning his shoes. The next morning, the protagonist realizes his book for class is in bad shape, so he sits next to Finn, saying he's glad to have a good friend. Later, he meets Cable, who drops a glass of water on the floor for him to clean. After that, he orders the protagonist to burn his clothes since burning books wasn't enough. In response, Finn refuses to do it, so Cable gets angry and uses magical ropes to punish him and make him kneel. On the other hand, the protagonist tries to find Finn to give him his book. When he finds him, he realizes that Finn is injured, so he approaches him while Finn apologizes for burning his books. After this, the protagonist grabs Cable by the hair and throws him to the ground. Just at that moment, Vice Director Farman appears, saying he will be punished for what happened. However, the protagonist hits him and starts digging a hole to bury him, throwing dirt on it. Later, he stands before the director, who shows him a paper from the magic agency ordering his expulsion. Nevertheless, he mentions he won't do it because he wants the protagonist to become an illuminated one. For this reason, he begins to explain what he must do. However, he realizes the protagonist can't process everything he's saying, so he summarizes, saying that he should excel in his classes while he takes care of Farman and the agency. The next day, a student named Tom asks the protagonist to join his team for a broom duel, so he agrees. On the day of the duel, it begins. While the others face each other in the air, the protagonist remains standing on the ground. As a result, Finn and the other students start to worry when they see the other team scoring points while the protagonist protagonist does nothing. In light of this, Tom approaches him and scolds him, saying he should be like bamboo, which the protagonist doesn't understand, thinking that he's high. With that said, Tom explains the rules of the game, saying they just have to take the ball and pass it through a hoop. After this, Tom tries to return to the duel when suddenly an opposing player hits him and throws him to the ground. Moreover, they manage to score 50 points compared to Tom's team, which has only 10. Then, the protagonist tries to help Tom, while the guy leaves on his broom, mentioning that the only thing that matters is winning. On the contrary, Tom tells the protagonist that the most important thing is to give it their all. After that, the protagonist takes his broom and makes a giant leap. Additionally, he starts floating by moving his feet quickly. Then, one of his teammates passes him the ball, and he throws it with great force, successfully passing it through the hoop. Subsequently, the ball returns to his hands, thanks to the effect he uses on the throw. In this way, the protagonist repeats the same thing over and over until they reach 999 points, causing his team to win. He also earns his first silver coin. Later, Tom approaches him and hugs him to express gratitude. In the evening, we see a guy named Lance who reads the interview they did with the protagonist after winning the duel, affirming that he will be next. The next day, Tom and Lemon try to get close to the protagonist. However, he doesn't seem to pay them much attention. Suddenly, Lance appears and claims he wants to do something fun. Seeing him, Lemon recognizes him and realizes that he was the top-scoring student on the entrance exam. Later, Lance takes out a magical bottle and opens it, causing Tom, Lemon, and Finn to be trapped inside. Then, he tells the protagonist that if he wants to free them, he'll have to go to the forest with him. Once in that place, Lance takes 2 silver coins and says he wants to bet them in a fight against the protagonist. Tom is surprised since very few people manage to earn 2 coins in such a short time. He also notices that Lance has 2 lines on his face, which is very rare to see as most magicians have only 1 line. Subsequently, the protagonist accepts the challenge, and Lance uses his magic to create a battlefield. Meanwhile, Regro and Brad get scared when they realize what's happening. Back with the protagonist, he charges at Lance, who uses his gravity magic to push him into the ground. However, the protagonist tries to get up and ends up hitting the ground, managing to uproot an entire tree. He then tries to hit Lance, who barely manages to dodge and loses his necklace. Seeing this, the protagonist notices a picture of a girl in Lance's necklace and accuses him of being a pedophile. Lance explains that the girl is his younger sister and that he's obsessed with her. He claims she's the most precious treasure in the world. Afterward, he takes the magical bottle and tells the protagonist that he'll throw it off the cliff, and he should try to save his friends so Lance can easily attack him. Just at that moment, Lance begins to remember how his sister used to heal him when he got into fights. However, one day, his sister, named Anna, got sick, so their parents decided to hand her over to the government when she ran out of magic due to the illness. As a result, Lance got angry with them and promised Anna that he would become the illuminated one to save her life. Back to the present, Lance throws the bottle, while the protagonist puts on his gym clothes and races after the bottle at maximum speed until he returns to the same spot and realizes that the bottle is fake. So, he searches for Lance until he finds his friends and tells them to end the fight there, as Lance doesn't seem to be a bad person. Therefore, Lance agrees and gives him one of his coins. Finally, Finn and his friends thank him for saving them. The next morning, it is explained that the academy has 3 residences or groups that compete to improve their skills. It's also made clear that the Adler residence is the one to which the protagonist and Finn belong. Here, we see both of them in their room, while the protagonist expresses his happiness at having a peaceful day. Afterward, Finn remembers they haven't done their potion homework, so he gets agitated as failing to deliver it could cost them points. Lance enters the room and scolds them, saying they'll ruin the residence's reputation. The protagonist approaches him and shows him the picture of his little sister, causing Lance to faint. Later, he takes them to the kitchen to help them with the homework. There, he grabs a mandrake, which doesn't stop crying. However, he uses his magic to put it to sleep, mentioning that when it's asleep, it can be a great ingredient for potions. Therefore, Finn and the protagonist try to put them to sleep, but they can't manage it. So, Lance explains to Finn that he needs to use his wand slowly, which he does, and he successfully puts the mandrake to sleep. In contrast, the protagonist's mandrake becomes agitated, so he hits it, causing it to fall to the ground. After this, Lance teaches them how to prepare the potion by cutting and cooking the mandrake. The protagonist claims to be an expert in the kitchen, so he tries to do the same, eventually managing to make some cream puffs. Therefore, Lance explains it again. However, despite not taking taking his eyes off the task, the protagonist ends up preparing cream puffs again. Later, a guy named Dot runs into others who tell him to be careful when walking, which Dot doesn't like, so he attacks them until they're lying on the ground. On the other hand, we see the Lang residents gathered in a basement, while the leader orders them to steal coins from all the members of Adler. The next day, the protagonist and his friends meet Dot, who gets angry with the protagonist for getting the attention of the girls like Lemon. So, he starts saying that because of men like him, the girls don't pay attention to others. He claims that's why he wants to become the illuminated one to create a world without womanizers. However, the protagonist doesn't pay him the slightest attention until the teacher appears and announces that the Lang residents will have that class with him. Having said that, he opens a portal where he shows them that to earn coins, they must fight against some scorpions in the forest and remove the stones on their heads. At the beginning, a guy named Silva grabs the protagonist by the shoulder, claiming that he surely feels special for having done incredible things. He even hits him with some magic until the teacher stops him. Then, the protagonist tries to go after him, but Lance stops him, mentioning that it's best to ignore him as the guy has even hurt teachers. But they haven't expelled him because they value his magic. He also says that he's part of the Lang residents. In the forest, the protagonist gets separated from Lance due to being distracted. He encounters Dot, who hears a girl's voice asking for help. So, both of them arrive at the scene, and Dot takes down a guy who wanted to harm her. Afterward, the girl thanks him, making Dot nervous. Then, she confesses that she uses her beauty magic to enchant boys, so she tries to use it on the protagonist, who doesn't seem to pay her any attention. Therefore, the girl increases her magic, but the protagonist remains uninterested. Next, she tells them that Silva has been bothering her. Upon hearing this, Dot tells her that he will defend her and fight against Silva. With this, Silva attacks them, so Dot stands in front and uses his explosive magic to attack him, creating several fireballs and using them against him. After the explosions, he realizes that Silva doesn't have a scratch. Then, Silva attacks him, accidentally knocking the protagonist's bun to the ground. Later, Silva says he's bored, so he challenges Dot to endure 5 of his blows to let the girl be. In response, Dot decides to accept, even though the girl tries to prevent it. However, Silva mentions that the protagonist must endure them too. Nevertheless, Dot claims he will endure 10 blows. So, Silva starts hitting him directly in the stomach time after time, until he reaches the 9th blow. Despite being very hurt, Dot remains standing, saying that, even though he's an idiot, he would never hesitate to protect a girl. Finally, Silva prepares his last blow and attacks Dot with all his strength, leaving him lying on the ground. But surprisingly, Dot manages to get up and approaches Silva without any strength left. Then, the girl also approaches and tells him that he's an idiot. So, Silva starts making fun of him until the protagonist covers his mouth with a bun. On the other hand, Lance comments that he's worried about the protagonist, to which Lemon and Finn reply that he's probably fine. However, Lance explains that there are more powerful wizards than the protagonist. Back with Silva, he grabs Dot by the hair and tries to hit him again. So, the protagonist lands a punch on him, but he manages to stop it with his magic. Then, he keeps attacking him until the protagonist increases his muscles, evades Silva's attacks, and punches him in the stomach, leaving him lying down. Despite this, Silva continues to attack him, mentioning that he's on a higher level than him. However, the protagonist destroys his shield and punches him in the stomach, leaving him defeated. With nothing else to do, Silva kneels, watching the protagonist sit down instead of continuing to hit him. After this, the protagonist asks if he can endure 8 more blows. He approaches Silva, and a giant scorpion with a star on its head appears behind them. When it tries to decapitate the protagonist, he punches it, making it fly and removing the star. Seeing this, Silva decides to give up, so the girl starts crying, thinking that the protagonist will hurt her too. However, he hugs her from behind and throws her to the ground, saying that he treats boys and girls the same. Later, Lemon and the boys find the protagonist, and he asks Lemon to attend to Dot a bit. As a result, Dot thanks the protagonist. Then, Lance explains that the Lang residence is made up of nobles like Silva, who are determined to steal coins from others. Consequently, the protagonist's pocket begins to shine, indicating that he has completed a gold coin. Next, he has a memory where when he entered the academy, all the students had to touch a unicorn's horn, which told them which residence they should join. When it was his turn, the unicorn realized that the only thing in the protagonist's mind was cream puffs, so it decided to send him to Adler. Back in the present, Lance advises him not to stray from them as the people from Lang will be looking for him to steal his coins, as they want to win the position of the illuminated one. However, later, we see the protagonist alone in the academy looking for a classroom. On the other hand, Silva apologizes apologizes to the Lang residence leader, who scolds him for his incompetence and turns him into a doll, mentioning that only he deserves to be the illuminated one. Right at this moment, the protagonist enters through the door and asks if he's playing with a doll. To this, the leader realizes that the protagonist is the guy everyone is talking about, so he asks him why he wants to become the illuminated one. In response, the protagonist tells him that he wants to live in peace with his family. Then, the leader explains that the illuminated one is a divine envoy meant to shape and change the world. Therefore, he wants that power to return the world to its original state, where the strong feed off the weak to grow. Having said that, he mentions to the protagonist that if he gives him his gold coin, he'll let him go. Obviously, the protagonist refuses. Therefore, one of the dolls attacks him, but he easily defeats it, freeing the leader from the control, turning him back into a human, and realizing that he's Silva. However, another giant doll captures him and takes his coin and sends it to the leader. As a result, the protagonist decides to take the boy with him, stating that he will fight the leader again. Then, he notices that the giant doll is missing a button on its clothing, so one of the girls realizes that at the same time the doll launched the coin, the protagonist removed one of its buttons and replaced it with the coin, then sucked it in with force. Therefore, the leader looks foolish as he holds a simple button in his hands. Meanwhile, the protagonist takes Silva to the infirmary. Later, Silva wakes up and asks him why he saved him, to which he replies that one must help others. On the other hand, Dot and Lance argue in Finn's room because they can't stand each other, but before they start fighting, the protagonist arrives and stops them. Then, Dot gives Finn a small packet of herbal tea, mentioning that when visiting another house, it's customary to bring something. Later, Lemon enters the room and asks them to accompany her. She shows them a magical scale that displays which residence has more coins, explaining that Lang has 12, Adler has only 1, unlike the Orca residents who focus solely on their studies. Upon hearing this, the boys decide to confront the Lang students to earn coins. Later, the protagonist is tasked with cleaning the bird farm as a punishment from the director for a week. At this moment, Lance appears and mentions that he will help him, as the Lang students will surely try to attack him. Meanwhile, Allor and Answer, 2 Lang members, approach the farm. Upon arrival, Allor uses his magic to create a water well at the protagonist's feet. He also attempts to attack Lance, who realizes and dodges the attack. Afterward, Allor transforms into a shark and jumps into the water to attack the protagonist. In contrast, Answer takes his weapon and attacks Lance, who remains still and receives the blow. Seeing that he doesn't defend himself, Answer attacks him again, causing even more damage, as Lance sees his sister who tells him not to harm the birds. Therefore, Answer mocks him upon realizing that he ran away from home. Having said that, he prepares his third attack when suddenly Lance defends himself and uses his gravity magic to stop his weapon. In this, Answer realizes that he moved the birds out of the way to avoid harming. As a result, Lance sinks him into the ground, stating that nobody will beat him because his motivation for winning fights is to rescue his sister. On the other hand, Allor tries to locate the protagonist until he sees something pass by at super speed. Therefore, he uses his magic to become larger, claiming that nobody will defeat him. After that, the protagonist charges against him and begins to strike him repeatedly until he defeats him. After this, both of them earn a gold coin. Next, a Lang member arrives wearing a mask, stating that he only wants to pick up his comrades. However, the protagonist attacks him, but he quickly dodges. Then, he uses a magic bottle and takes Allor and Answer with him. On the way, the masked one realizes that the protagonist managed to touch him a little, even without using magic, so he claims that his speed is similar to his. Furthermore, he faces a guy named Rhodes, a member of the Orca residence, to steal his coin. As a result, the masked one defeats Rhodes and steals his coins. On the other hand, Lance tells the protagonist that they will have to locate the Lang students to avoid waiting for them to attack. In addition, he gives the Adler residence robe while the protagonist prepares his cream puffs. At this moment, Lemon appears and tells them that Tom is in the infirmary. Upon arrival, they notice that he looks very worn out. Therefore, they ask him what happened, and he tells them that all he remembers is being in a dream where he was locked in a box and couldn't speak. Then, Lemon gives the protagonist a cream puff with a ribbon as a good luck charm. Subsequently, Lance realizes that many students are in the infirmary, and Tom explains that none of them can use their magic. The director has gone to the magic agency to find out what's going on. In the evening, Lance and the boys start walking around the academy until they discover Lemon. However, they hide when they see that she is being controlled, and her body looks like a puppet. Later, they follow her until they reach a dead end. Therefore, Lance uses his magic to reveal a secret door. Then, Dot tries to open it with his fireballs, but he can't. After that, the protagonist uses a knight's armor and sword to lift the door and throw it out of the academy. Inside the basement, they realize there's a light at the end of the hallway. They head there, where they encounter a guy who challenges them to a fight where they have to wager one of their coins. Dot claims he will fight him because he hates pretty boys like him. With that, the guy activates his magic. On the other hand, the director meets with the magic agency official, who tells him that 3 prisoners escaped from prison with the help of a guy named Zero. Back in the basement, the guy attacks Dot, who dodges his strikes and shoots his fireballs. Then, the guy confesses that he's stronger than Silva. In response, Dot uses a new magic and surrounds the guy with marks on the floor. However, the guy avoids touching them and attacks Dot, tangling him with his vines and hurting him with his thorns. Later, when he tries to deliver the finishing blow, one of the marks on the floor explodes, freeing Dot. Then, he explains that each bomb has a timer to explode. Having said that, the other bombs explode. However, thinking it's all over, the boys are consumed by the floor. As a result, they end up separated. On one side, Lance encounters a guy named Mashle, who is a Lang member. On the other side, Finn and Dot meet 2 girls who introduce themselves as Cute and Milo. While Finn says goodbye to his life, both of them have 2 lines on their faces. For his part, the protagonist faces the masked one, who introduces himself as Razor. Having said that, Razor takes his sword for the fight. Back with Lance, he uses his gravity magic against Maddle, who sinks into the ground and appears behind him with other clones of himself. He then attacks Lance, who uses his magic again to stop him. Maddle disappears once more and returns to his normal form. Lance realizes his feet are trapped, so Maddle takes advantage and throws mud balls to harm him. Later, he releases him and suggests he join Lang because he pities him. Moreover, he claims that he can be stronger if he's with them. However, Lance tells him that his motivation to be strong goes beyond something so simple. Having said that, Lance throws him against the wall. Nevertheless, Maddle confesses that he covered the walls with mud to avoid getting hurt. After that, Lance starts throwing some rubble at him, which manages to injure Maddle. So he realizes that Lance has figured out his plan. Then, Maddle begins to think that he can't lose to him since he studied at the best school since he was a child and was able to join Lang effortlessly due to his power. Therefore, he takes out a potion, claiming that only Lang members have the right to consume the magical power of other students. After that, Maddle drinks the potion and increases his power. Then, he uses his magic to create a giant mud monster while he recalls how his father taught him to use his magic from a young age. Next, the monster attacks Lance, but he dodges its blow. He then uses a spell that forms columns with chains that attract the monster until it disappears. Seeing this, Maddle realizes that he has been defeated because he has no more spells to use. Then, he starts thinking that he has disappointed his father. Therefore, Lance tells him that he had a similar upbringing but left his home because he didn't share the same beliefs as his parents. Having said that, Lance leaves, and we switch to the protagonist, who launches himself at Razor, kicking him. After this, Razor takes his sword and cuts him a bit. Subsequently, he displays his magic in the form of arrows, which make him faster. He continues to cut the protagonist until he stops to tell him to surrender. Furthermore, he shows Lemon, who is unconscious, while her magic is being absorbed. Seeing this, the protagonist accepts to keep fighting, so Razor cuts him again and again until he buries his sword in his abdomen. When he tries to pull it out, the protagonist doesn't let him. Afterward, he holds him and punches him in the face, causing Razor's mask to shatter. Now, looking at his red eye, the protagonist asks him what's wrong. So Razor explains that his eye is named Evil Eye, which means the eye of the devil. Furthermore, he tells him that this eye has the power to absorb others' magic, which is why even his parents rejected him when he was a child. Having said that, Razor takes his sword and creates a giant shield that makes him faster while it slows down the protagonist. As a result, Razor keeps injuring the protagonist until he decides to finish him. Nevertheless, he hits the ground, distracting Razor, who loses his sword due to the blow from the protagonist, who manages to catch it by stepping on his foot. Later, he concentrates his strength and throws Razor outside of the shield. Consequently, the protagonist positions himself beneath him and punches him again. However, Razor reacts and tries to use a piece of his sword to kill him, but the protagonist stops him and throws him against the wall. In this way, he continues to give him a severe beating, and Razor doesn't know what to do. Finally, the protagonist hugs him and throws him to the ground, completely breaking his shield. As a result, Razor remains lying on the ground and tells the protagonist that his parents locked him up when they saw his eye, and although they fed him every day, they stopped feeding him, and they even tried to kill him. At that moment, he understood that he was useless, so he joined Lang's leader, named Abel. Hearing this, the protagonist tells him that he'd like to be his friend because he's not a bad person. Nevertheless, Razor replies that due to his eye, he probably won't want to. Moreover, he advises him to stop because Abel has much more power than he does. To this, the protagonist responds that he must still give him a beating. Having said that, the protagonist leaves, affirming that they can meet again and share cream puffs next time. On the other hand, we see a boy who finds the basement door and decides to enter. On the other hand, Finn and Dot face Cute since Milo Milo leaves her alone. Afterward, Cute asks them if she is pretty, to which Dot replies that she is, but he can't fall in love with her because he loves Lemon. Hearing this, Cute gets angry and attacks them, so Dot defends himself using his magic. Then, Cute asks them again if they like her. However, Dot tells her again that he's only in love with Lemon. To this, Cute hits him with her attack, claiming that her dad has told her that she can kill boys who mistreat her. In response, Dot throws fireballs to distract her amidst the smoke, trying to take her wand, but she notices and throws him to the ground. Subsequently, she uses her magic to create a large tornado from which Dot can't escape. Now, without even being able to move, Cute begins to taunt him, confessing that Milo will use his magic to turn the protagonist into stone in just half an hour. Meanwhile, he has a memory where his sister defended him from some kids and told him that when he finds a true friend, he shouldn't disappoint them. Thinking of this, Dot frees himself from the tornado, and a mark appears on his forehead. Seeing it, Cute gets scared since she recognizes that his power has increased. After that, Dot attacks her with a rain of fire, but decides not to hurt her, saying he doesn't like to hurt girls. Consequently, a stone monster attacks Finn, so Dot runs to his aid and stops it. Later, Milo appears and scolds Cute for not defeating the boys. Then, he attacks them with giant stone hands. Just then, Finn hits Milo with his sword and throws him to the ground. Immediately, a divine luminary named Rain appears. Subsequently, Milo tries to attack him from behind, but he destroys his stone doll without even looking. He then gathers a group of swords and throws them at Milo, who is left powerless. As a result, Rain starts kicking him and tells Dot and Finn to leave. This is when Finn claims that Rain is his brother. Later, as Rain walks through the basement, he encounters the protagonist, who is eating a cream puff. He then shows him a spider and explains that he will measure his magic power to find out if he's a real magician or not. Therefore, he attacks him with a sword, but the protagonist manages to stop it with his fingers. As a result, the spider indicates that his magic power is 0. However, Rain keeps trying and tests him with more swords, so the protagonist dodges them and forms a chair with them, to which the spider keeps confirming that he has no magical power. Finally, Rain throws more of his swords. In response, the protagonist takes one and stops the others as if he were playing baseball. Then, Rain asks for his name, and he realizes that he's the same boy the director spoke to him about, so he apologizes and gives him a magical handkerchief that can heal wounds. Moreover, Rain tells him that he will leave him alone to fight against Abel because the director told him that he wants to become the Illuminator. By defeating Abel, he can achieve that since he has the majority of the coins in the school. Having said that, Rain continues on his way while remembering the director's words, who told him that the protagonist saved his brother. On the other hand, the protagonist encounters Abel after knocking the door to the ground. Seeing everything, the protagonist realizes that Abel is stealing magic from many students. Subsequently, he comments that he is amazed by what he has done, as he managed to defeat Razor and face Rain without using magic. Furthermore, they tell him that when he becomes the Illuminator, he will destroy anyone who cannot use magic and those who protect him. Upon hearing this, the protagonist remembers how Regro took care of him when he was a child, so he responds to Abel that they cannot be friends. After this, some puppets attack the protagonist, but he hits them. However, he realizes that they contain acid inside their bodies, so he grabs one's head and throws it with all his strength against the others, managing to defeat them without having to fight against them, leaving Cute in shock. Next, 3 giant puppets attack the protagonist, but he immediately strikes them and sinks them into the wall. Later, the protagonist starts hitting himself for no reason, until he appears to be controlled like a marionette, causing him to strangle himself. However, Abel stops and shows him Finn, who is being controlled by him. Afterward, he uses Finn to strike the protagonist, who doesn't defend himself to avoid harming his friend. Nevertheless, he stops and takes out his gold coin, which he flicks with his fingers, thus cutting the strings controlling Finn. As a result, Abel once again controls the protagonist, but he refuses to obey, and frees himself from his strings, managing to punch Abel in the face. Then, he uses his magic and turns Abel into a marionette. He approaches to take the coin but only finds a cream puff. As a result, the protagonist punches him, and he returns to normal, surprising Abel, who claims that his magic causes the brain not to send signals to the body, which allowed the protagonist to react that way thanks to his reflexes. Seeing all this, Abel acknowledges that the protagonist has a lot of power. However, he continues by saying that he will finish him using the magic he took from the students. In this way, he creates a 3-headed marionette. Furthermore, he explains to the protagonist that there are invisible threads throughout the room, and if he touches them, his body will stop working. After saying this, the marionette attempts to strike the protagonist again and again until Abel realizes that the protagonist managed to tear the threads. Seeing this, Cute realizes that, from the beginning, the protagonist held the threads when they fell on his left shoulder. Therefore, the marionette launches itself at him, so the protagonist hits and overpowers it. Next, he embraces Abel from behind and pushes him to the ground. This is when he remembers his mother, who was from the upper class but always spent time in the village with the poor people because she felt that everyone was equal. However, one day, while she was feeding them, a man stabbed her, claiming that those of her class always lived better than they did. Upon hearing this, the protagonist tells him that if he did all that for his mother, it means he's not that bad. Later, Abel releases all the students and hands Lemon to the protagonist. Subsequently, Finn joins them, and they celebrate their victory. In addition, Dot appears with a dejected face, claiming that he also fought for them. On the other hand, we see Lance, who encounters Rain, and he discovers his true identity, realizing that he is, in fact, Zero. So he claims that he will go to the sea to find Abel. He runs off while another criminal named John stops Rain. On another note, Razor remembers how Abel invited him to join his team despite his eye. Later, we see him walking in search of his leader. In the meantime, we also see Regro and Brad, who have tea while wondering what will become of the protagonist's life. Back with the boys, we see that they continue to celebrate until the protagonist claims that he has to go to the bathroom. Subsequently, Zero appears and removes Dot and the others from his path to reach Abel. After that, he uses his magic to make him strangle himself for not fulfilling his mission. Just then, the protagonist arrives, claiming he has made cream puffs to celebrate. However, due to a fly landing on his nose, he ends up throwing the cream puffs at Zero, who throws them on the ground and focuses on hurting Abel. Later, he tries to go through Abel's body, but Razor arrives and stands in the middle to receive the blow. Upon seeing this, Zero recognizes that the protagonist threw a stone at him before attacking Abel, preventing his attack from being lethal. Consequently, the protagonist stomps the floor hard and throws a rock at Zero, who easily catches and licks it, claiming that he will finish the protagonist as well. In response, the protagonist tells him that if he doesn't let him take Razor to the infirmary, he will give him a beating. This causes Zero to laugh, and he moves away while opening 3 magical portals from which attacks are sent towards the protagonist. Then, the protagonist defends himself with his fists, while Abel claims that he won't be able to defeat Zero since both have different talents, just as their mother used to tell him when he was little. However, the protagonist continues to protect Razor and mentions to Abel that Razor took care of him because he felt happy doing so. Having said that, Zero continues to attack the protagonist with pieces of coal. Abel recalls when his mother told him to be kinder to others. Then, Zero increases the size of the coal pieces to finish off the protagonist. However, Abel suddenly creates a giant marionette to shield the protagonist. Afterward, the marionette attacks Zero, who quickly destroys it, but suddenly, the protagonist emerges from the marionette's mouth and manages to punch Zero in the face. However, Zero heals the wound and produces a magical mirror. When Dot sees it, he realizes that the mirror reflects the opponent's magic, sending back any spell they cast. Therefore, he asks the protagonist to stop since using magic is impossible. However, the protagonist shatters the mirror into pieces and strikes Zero in the face. As a result, the boys realize that since entering the academy, the protagonist has never used magic. On the other hand, Zero notices that a small part of his hand has just appeared, so he realizes that the protagonist is the boy he has been searching for. Therefore, he opens a large portal from which giant hands emerge, carrying him inside. Later, Abel thanks the protagonist because his handkerchief saved Razor's life. That said, the protagonist's friends promise to keep his secret as he could be expelled otherwise. However, one of the students wakes up and claims to have overheard the truth, so the protagonist becomes concerned and starts eating cream puffs. Furthermore, we see Zeri, who meets with her father and tells him that she managed to get what she wanted so badly, and that's how the first season of this anime ends. If you've reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you've been one of the few people to make it this far, so comment the word muscles in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.